Are you basically saying we should not eat fruit?
Look, we should be eating fruit in season.
In season.
The average apple in a grocery store is over a year old.
Are you kidding me?
No, over a year old. Ooh! Sickness is good for business. The sicker we are, the better the pharmaceutical companies do, the better big medicine does, and the better big agriculture does. There's no such thing as an anti-inflammatory food. You have to have foods that help your microbiome grow and foster, and then help seal your leaky gut.
From being one of America's most distinguished heart surgeons to now helping his patients change their diets to avoid surgery, New York Times bestselling author of The Plant Paradox, Dr. Stephen Gundry is on a mission to provide the keys to the doors to heal a number of chronic illnesses such as low energy, obesity, heart disease, autoimmune conditions, diabetes, and many, many more. He even has me on the lectin-free diet. Welcome to Toxic-Free with KB, Dr. Stephen Gundry.
Welcome to Toxic-Free with KB, the podcast where we dive deep into the world of what it means to live a toxic-free life. I'm your host, KB. I'm a toxic-free lifestyle advisor and a diehard advocate for clean living. I'm here to guide you through the journey towards reclaiming your health and vitality. From the products we use, the foods we eat, and the relationships we share, we'll explore practical tips and strategies to create a life of balance. It's time to start living your best life. We're all in this together.
Dr. Gundry, on Toxic-Free with KB, I have this inkling, this curiosity, because I know a little bit about your past, but you had high blood pressure, bad cholesterol, digestive issues, your body felt weak, and you were dangerously overweight. And then you lost 70 pounds in just 1 year. So how'd you do it?
Well, I lost 50 pounds in 1 year, but 70 pounds total. So how's that?
Hey, total. Hey,
in fact, you don't want to lose more than 50 pounds in a year.
Oh, really? Why is that so?
You really want to know?
Yeah. Yes.
You're not old enough to remember, but there was a very interesting experiment done in the Arizona desert called Biosphere 2, where they built a bunch of geodesic domes and they took some idiot volunteers and they put them in these domes as if they were living on the surface of Mars for a year.
Okay.
And their job was to grow all their own food, produce all their own oxygen in this biosphere. And they had plants and they had water and all this stuff. And they recruited a bunch of people, and it was a horrible failure. They eventually had to start trucking in food after about 6 months because these people lost huge amounts of weight. And one of the researchers was a pathologist from UCLA by the name of Ray Wolford. And he's famous because he was the mentor of Walter Longo, who's the head of longevity at USC.
All right, I know.
Okay.
Yep.
So Dr. Wolford's job, among other things, he was a calorie restriction guy. And he thought that this experiment was the greatest thing because everybody literally lost about a third of their body weight in 6 months' time. Mm-hmm. And he thought it was cool, except what they found was that their levels of heavy metals and toxins in their blood went sky high. And since we're talking about toxic-free,
right,
it took a year for their heavy metals to return to normal.
Interesting.
So he did a little calculations and he realized that the safe weight loss to keep heavy metals from building up in your blood was actually 50 pounds in 1 year, or 1 pound a week, or 25 pounds in 6 months, or 12.5 pounds in 3 months. And that you shouldn't exceed that. And the data, these are human data. And the data was that impressive, so that when I designed my program, I aimed for 50 pounds in 1 year. And I've actually had other people, I've had to pull them back because they were losing weight too quickly. So there you go.
Well, I love that. That's like fun fact.
You had to ask.
Well, I'm all about curiosity. And I mean, I think that's why I started Toxic-Free with KB, is because actually, little do y'all know, I work with Dr. Gundry. He's my doctor. And I had to be for so long an advocate for my own health. I have been thrown here and there and no answers and take this blood test and hey, take this pill. And I just got so sick and tired that I did, like you, kind of like the research for myself, and I had to experiment on myself. And then I fell into your hands and we're working through a lot of stuff. And I have to say, this is like not a plug, but I'm feeling a lot better.
Great.
And so I think that goes to show that when we are educated, like really truly educated, then we can start to make the changes happen.
True.
Right?
Yep.
So how did you lose? Back to the question. How did you lose 50 pounds, 70 overall?
Well, when I met this guy who changed my life, who I call Big Ed in all my books, who reversed his inoperable coronary artery disease with a diet that he designed and taking a bunch of supplements from a health food store. When he started describing his diet to me, I said, wait a minute. This is actually sounds like my research project as an undergraduate at Yale University. And back in the dark ages, you could go to Yale and design your own major. And you could design the professors you wanted to work with. And it was kind of like a master's degree. And you had to have a thesis, and you had to research it, and you had to defend your thesis. And my thesis was you could take a great ape, manipulate its environment, manipulate its food supply, and prove you'd arrive at a human being. And so I did that, and I wrote a thesis, and I actually got an honors on it, and I gave it to my parents and went away to become a famous heart surgeon. And didn't think much about it. But I became a nice obese famous heart surgeon. And so when Big Ed is describing the diet he used, he lost 35 pounds in 6 months. And he's describing my thesis. And so I called my parents, who lived in San Diego at the time, and said, hey, do you still have my thesis? And
they said, gifted you? I worked so hard.
Yeah, and they said, oh yeah, it's in the shrine next to the eternal flame, and I said, well, send it up to me. And so they did. And so I literally put myself on my thesis. And I actually started taking a bunch of supplements, and lo and behold, just like Big Ed, the weight just started coming off.
Did it fall off?
Well, literally, 50 pounds in a year, that's a lot of weight.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Let's jump into those key elements of your program, right? Some people are like, I don't know if I believe this. I don't know if I don't, but you have to try for yourself.
Right.
But it's all about, nutrition and gut health. Obviously, you talk about so many other aspects like the brain-gut connection. And now I'm interested in, we're going to get into it a little further, but oral and gut connection. Whoa. Yeah, I'm learning about that right now. It's something I'm dealing with. But lectins and their impact, right? You've really thrown out that term lectins, which I'm like, yeah, I get it. Lectins. I have an idea, but what is a lectin?
Well, a lectin is a protein, and it's a protein that seeks to bind with certain sugar molecules. And lectins have been known about since the 1800s. In fact, fun fact, blood typing is done with lectins. And depending on which lectin binds to the sugar molecule on your particular blood cell, red blood cells, determines your blood type. And it turns out that lectins will bind to these sugar molecules depending on your blood type, even in your gut. In fact, you may have noticed, you may have heard that people with blood type A were more susceptible.
I'm the problem.
Were more susceptible to the COVID virus binding to their gut. And in fact, people with blood type A are far more susceptible to viruses binding to their endothelial surfaces in their lungs and in their gut.
Interesting.
Sorry about that.
I know. Raynaud's, leaky gut. all the things, right? And
Yeah.
I'm blood type A.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
Yeah. So lectins aren't new. They're not fashionable. Now, lectins were first fashionable with the Eat Right for Your Type diet, the blood type diet
I have that book.
by Dr. D'Amato. And he was pretty clever. I have a lot of respect for his research in lectins. And his dad was actually a blood pathologist. And that's actually where he got the idea. Now, it turns out that O's are the most common. So you want to sell books. And so he decided, for no good reason, that O's were hunter-gatherers and that you ought to, eat meat and chicken and fish. And you weren't big on plants. And so that hit a really good note, particularly with the Atkins era of low carb. And so the blood type diet is a lectin avoidant diet, but it really doesn't have much to do with your blood type and what you should be eating. But avoiding lectins is a good idea.
Why is it such a good idea?
Right. So that gets back to my research at Yale. It turns out we diverged from great apes about 8 million years ago. And great apes, there's actually a couple cool things about great apes and us. Great apes are called great apes because about 12 million years ago, they suffered a genetic mutation. They stopped making a funny enzyme called uricase that breaks down uric acid. Some people hear the word uric acid and they think about gout, which is true. And uric acid can cause uric acid kidney stones. But one thing about uric acid is normally, if you and I, well, not you and I, if a monkey eats fruit, he'll burn fructose as a fuel. With the mutation, great apes couldn't burn fructose as a fuel because they lacked the enzyme. Their enzymes take fructose and take it directly to the liver, and it's converted into two substances. One is triglycerides. Everybody says, I got my triglycerides checked on my lipid panel. Triglycerides are the first form of fat that we make from sugar, fructose. Great apes, and we make uric acid. And uric acid produces, among other things, insulin resistant. So all of a sudden now, you've got the perfect thing where you could eat fruit, which would only happen seasonally, even in the jungle, and you would store it as fat. So what? Well, at that time, there was climate change and forests were receding and it was becoming drier. So great apes could outcompete other monkeys because whenever they ate fruit, they would store it as fat. So they could go long periods of time on their fat where other monkeys couldn't. The reason they're called great apes is that made them outcompete all other monkeys, and that explains why great apes basically kind of took over the world. We inherited that same mutation, and there's a good reason we're called the fat ape, because we can take fructose and convert it into fat, and no other animals besides great apes can do that.
So fructose, we're thinking fruit. A lot of the times. Is it all fruit?
Fruit.
Are you basically saying we should not eat fruit?
No, I'm not saying that. In fact, in all my books, I said, look, we should be eating fruit in season.
I have discovered this product that has literally changed my life. I use it time and time again when basically I feel as though I need a little more oomph in my self-care routine. I'm talking Medicine Mama's Vulva Care. Guys, did you know that vulvas are a vital part of women's health? Yeah, They have been ignored for far too long. And Vulva Care creates the space and time for women of all ages to get in touch with every part of their bodies. Medicine Mama has done just that. They've created a line of vulva skincare products that are hormone-free, OBGYN approved, clinically tested, and have over 12,000 five-star reviews. Probably more by now. I use the Vulva Balm every single day, and let me tell you, it is so nourishing and luscious and doesn't disrupt my vaginal pH. Hallelujah, ladies. Try Medicine Mama for yourself and let me know what you think. Get 15% off all menopause, pregnancy, postpartum, grooming, and even sexual wellness products. You know what I'm talking about. You can use my code Toxin-Free15 at checkout. Again, that code for 15% off all purchases, use code Toxin-Free15. Guys, if you want to learn more, tune into Toxic Free with KB, episode number 282 with the Medicine Mama herself, Dr. Claire Bertuccio. I have two amazing fur pups. I've got Poppy and I've got Harley Girl. I'm just pretty much a dog freak. When I found Botanical Bones, I had to contact the owner and I had to ask, oh my gosh, can I get some Treatos for my pups? Of course. She sent a whole bundle my way and my dogs are obsessed. So they have 3 specific formulas that I want to shout out, and they are based upon traditional Chinese medicine, which y'all know me, I'm a huge fan of that. So they've got Inner Glow, which has chaga, dandelion root, and ginger. They've got Flower Power, which is blueberries, red clover, and reishi. And they've also got Balance and Calm, which has ashwagandha, lemon balm, and hemp seeds. So, of course, you can pick your quote unquote pup's favorite type of flavor, but let me tell you, the dogs will love them all. And trust me, I have literally sniffed them myself, and I'm thinking about trying a handful or two. I want to give you guys 10% off these amazing treats that your dogs will love and then will thank you for time and time again. 10% off using my code HONEST10, because we could all use a little more honesty in our diet, and I think our pups could too. So head on over to botanicalbones.com and use code HONEST10 for 10% off. Let me know what y'all think. In season.
There was no place still where fruit ripened 365 days a year, even in the jungle. Mm-hmm. Now, fruit has been hybridized to ripen 365 days a year, but that's a modern invention. And up until 50 years ago, there were no 747s bringing blueberries to Costco in February from Chile or Argentina.
Right.
Didn't exist.
Right.
So we now had a genetic mutation that was incredibly valuable. And it's sometimes called the thrifty gene. We now know it's this grade 8 mutation that makes us, every time we see or eat fructose, convert it into fat. And that was really useful for a very long time. But now it's become one of our deadliest killers, because fructose is ubiquitous in our diet, not only from fruit, which has been hybridized for sugar content, but also in high fructose corn syrup, which is in everything. So no matter what we're eating, a toxin, believe it or not, fructose in us is a toxin. It's a mitochondrial poison. And it's so dangerous that, believe it or not, we don't absorb it into our bloodstream. We take it to the liver to detoxify it into triglycerides and uric acid.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Oh, my gosh.
Well, hold on. But you did say we could have fruit in season.
In season.
Doesn't that apply with all foods, right?
Well, that's true.
When I think of foods that are picked and shipped over, I mean, I even go to the farmer's market sometimes here in Santa Barbara, and I'm like, why is this still green? Why is it so hard? I'm like, it probably shouldn't be that way, because it still has, when I think of lectins, I think of the protectors, right?
Yeah, exactly. When I was a kid, it was fun to go out and eat green apples that we would pick from trees. And you developed what was called the green apple 2-step.
What?
You got diarrhea.
Oh, nice.
And that's what it was called, the green apple two-step. And, kids are stupid. So we'd eat a bunch of green apples and get the green apple two-step. It turns out as long as the fruit is unripe, the plant does not want you to eat its fruit before it's ripe, because the seeds, they're babies, if you will, the plant really wants you to eat the seeds and fruit as long as they're protected against digestion. And they have a coating on them that resists digestion. They want you to eat their fruit, eat their babies. Their babies will go through your GI tract. You will wander off down the street and you will poop out their babies away from mommy with a generous dollop of fertilizer. And that's a wonderful thing. Now, did you ever wonder why you and I have color vision and our dogs don't?
No.
Did you ever wonder why the
Maybe.
only animals that have color vision are fruit eaters?
Interesting.
Or fruit pollinators? Because the plant uses color to tell its predator that the sugar content is high, and more importantly, the predator could care less that the babies are now protected. So they use lectins. Number one, they use color, like, okay, don't eat it green, you dummy. Number one, you're not going to get much sugar out of it. But they use lectins to actually dissuade you from eating it early because it's going to bother your gut. And that worked great until we got smart and said, hey, we can make something look ripe. We could pick it green in Argentina or even locally, and then throw a gas called ethylene oxide on it, and it'll look like it's ripe. But the lectin content is still high because you took it off of the plant before the plant reduced the lectins in the fruit to make it safe.
Yeah. And you know what kind of kills me about that whole aspect? I was actually one point in my life, in my 20s, I was living in Florida and I was grocery shopping down there. And I remember this man working in the produce section he said something random about the oranges. And I'm like, looking and seeing which one's ripe and stuff. And he goes, well, those ones, if they're shipped in, they just inject it with coloring. And I was like, really? And I will never forget that day. But it also comes into the case where I think consumers need to realize and kind of like bring that click in their head. Like, why isn't my orange, why is my orange lasting on my countertop for like months? And it's like not shriveling up, Bizarre.
When the organic movement started a few years ago now, when you went to the health food store to get your organic apple, it was all this shriveled up, it didn't look very good and appetizing. That's before they started spraying even organic apples with petrochemical things to keep them from dehydrating. Mm. In fact, I learned recently that the average apple in a grocery store is over a year old.
Are you kidding me?
No, over a year old.
Yeah, everyone's like...
Yeah, over a year old. Because we've gotten so good at disguising the fact that these things, you're right, they're never changing.
Yeah.
In fact, as an interesting segue, we lost our home in the mudslide here in Montecito.
Sorry.
The person we bought it from obviously was a Taco Bell fan and was an Oreo fan and was a pretzel fan. And this woman had huge glass containers, filled to the brim, beautifully arranged, of Oreo cookies and pretzels, and also Taco Bell taco sauce things. And they were they were really fun. And I said, if you don't mind, let's leave them here. And because it's kind of cool and it reminds me not to eat these things. Well, we've now been in our house. This will be our 5th year, 6th year, one of the two. These Oreo cookies are as pristine as the day they were put into that jar. The pretzels haven't changed a bit. There is no mold. There is no fungus. There are no bacteria. They are perfect. Now, if a mold or bacteria isn't interested in eating those things, why in the world would we put them in our mouth?
That's a good question. Because the bacteria and the molds in my stomach are not going to want to digest that little Emmer.
That's
mother
exactly right.
trucker.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. And, I wrote in one of the books, I've forgotten which one, I went to the Santa Barbara Farmers Market, and I went to Costco on the same day.
Yeah.
And I bought Costco strawberries and Farmer Market strawberries, organic. Put them in the refrigerator. In 3 days, the Santa Barbara strawberries were covered with mold. Beautiful bloom. Nothing on the Costco strawberries. A week later, the Costco strawberries are perfect. 2 weeks later, the Costco strawberries are perfect. A month later, the Costco strawberries are perfect. And it's like, oh my gosh, the mold doesn't have a... Why would I put those things in my mouth? Because not even the mold wants to eat them.
Well, and to be honest, I hate to be a hater on Costco, because I know the general population does need to shop at large supermarkets or distributors, but we as consumers can also vote by what we buy and what we support. Don't you agree?
Yeah, I like some Costco products. In fact, I've had a podcast on what to buy at Costco.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
We'll tune it in. But going back to the mold and also the gut microbiome, what is that? I know it's been thrown around here and there. And some people are like, well, I still don't quite understand.
So we used to think you swallowed food, it went down this hollow tube, magic happened, and what was left over came out the other side. Presto change-o, that's about all there is to it. We didn't know about the microbiome, this collection of bacteria that live in our mouths, live in our stomach, live in our small intestines, but mostly live in our colon, our large intestine. And it was thanks to the Human Microbiome Project that didn't get completed until 2017 that we didn't know there were 100 trillion organisms living in our gut, probably 10,000 different species of bugs. And then we learned who they were, but we had no idea what they did. And it's with each passing year that we're beginning to understand what each of those bugs does. And it's literally a tropical rainforest in our gut. In a tropical rainforest, there's, all these different species that compete, that cooperate. And if you don't have this species, you're not going to have that species, and blah, blah, blah. With every passing year, we learn more nuances about this literally tropical rainforest and how they relate to us, how they control us, and how they talk to our gut, how they talk to our brain, etc. One of the things we've learned is that there's actually should be bacteria that eat lectins. In fact, as I wrote about in the Plant Paradox, we're supposed to have an amazing defense system against lectins. And our microbiome was very good at eating them. In fact, believe it or not, there are bacteria that like to eat gluten, which happens to be a lectin. Most of us don't have those bacteria anymore because we've killed them off with antibiotics that we not only take for ourselves, but perhaps more importantly, 70% of all the antibiotics that are used in the United States are fed to our farm animals. Because about 40 years ago, it was discovered that, just by accident actually, if you fed antibiotics to animals, they would grow fatter and faster than if you didn't give them antibiotics. Mm-hmm. And so it became routine. Hey, this is great. Let's make some money. Let's, a chicken used to take 4 months, 6 months to resize where you could eat it. Now you can get a chicken to full size in a matter of weeks by giving them antibiotics and other wonderful growth promoting things. So what we didn't know is those antibiotics are in the meat of the things we eat. They're in our beef. They're in our pork. They're
in our water even.
They're in our water. They're in our fish. And what we didn't know was that those antibiotics kill off the bacteria in our gut. And it's like, what the heck? In fact, one round of antibiotics taken for, like a urinary tract infection can decimate, literally burn your tropical rainforest down to the ground. And it can take up to 2 years to repopulate your gut.
I think one of the hardest things to incorporate change into our lifestyles is probably our cleaning products, because a lot of people think just because that smell is coming out, that means it's clean. But truly, y'all, you've heard me talk about this time and time again, that smell could actually be a toxin. So something that I've actually incorporated in our household, and I actually send the kits to all of my friends and family members as gifts time and time again, is Branch Basics products. Guys, Branch Basics never set out to sell soap. They truly are on a mission to help people create healthy homes and experience the power of pure. I am totally on this game as well. And someone that has been highly sold is our house cleaner. She has helped toss the toxins with me, and she uses Branch Basics for all of our cleaning necessities at our house. And let me tell you, we don't always live in a clean space. We've got 3 kids, 2 dogs, I've got a husband, so we've got a lot of things to clean up. 3 of the things that have really popped into my shopping cart lately are their new formula laundry detergent. Their toxic-free candle, because baby girl loves a good bath time and sitting by the candles at night when she enjoys her good veggie bowls. And also their hand soap. But 2 of the staples that I live by in our household, and trust me when I tell you I can use this for everything, even on my pups, is their oxygen boost and their liquid gold concentrate. So guys, I'd like to help you get started on your cleaning by giving you 15% off all starter kits. And also, guys, this applies to their hand soap and their toxic-free candle, all the things. Not only will you get your starter kit, but you can get a whole bunch of other items to stock up on. Give the gift to yourself and use my code over at Branch Basics, which is Toxic-Free KB. Guys, again, if you want 15% off, use Toxic-Free KB.
Some people have to be on antibiotics, but there are also some protocols that you can do to protect your gut. And as you like to refer to them, your gut buddies.
Gut buddies.
Gut buddies. I'm going to be devil and I'm going to be the angel. So what are the toxic foods that are harming our gut?
Well, there are too many to count, but
name some very common ones.
Well, I think one of the paper that a lot of people ought to read is, grains, the double-edged sword of humanity. Grains allowed us, and grains and beans allowed us to survive, but it was at an incredible cost to our health, and we're still paying that cost. So most grains and beans are loaded with lectins. Now, if you look at cultures through the years, successful cultures have figured out a way to lessen the toxicity of grains. And usually it was by a fermentation. One of the fun things I like to point out to people is the Incas used quinoa as their grain. But the Incas didn't sit around and eat quinoa raw. They didn't just cook quinoa. They actually fermented it. They soaked it. They let it rot. And then they cooked it. And it's not on the package directions. I was just talking with a patient yesterday who happens to be Hispanic, and we were talking about corn. And she said, wow, corn is what my people ate. And, we eat corn and we're used to corn. And I said, well, no, you're not. Corn was so deadly that corn was treated traditionally with lye, with alkali. 2 reasons. Number one, it took the hull off of corn, and the hull, the outer coating of a grain is where most of the lectins are. So it removed the hull, and you get what's called hominy. And then you would grind hominy into hominy grits, and then you would grind it further, and you would have masa flour. And all traditional flours, tortillas, were made from masa flour because it had been treated with alkali. And that's almost completely lost. Interestingly, there is a very famous Mexican restaurant down on Milpa Street that you and I may have gone to that still uses masa flour to make their tortillas. Can I say the name?
Sure.
La Supa Rica.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a little blue building.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was Julia Child, the only place that Julia Child would go and eat Mexican food, because she knew the history of how actually corn was detoxified so it wouldn't kill the people who needed to use corn as their food.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I love that. So a little educational research certainly helps. But, you know, when we talk about preparation, because I know I'm on the lectin-free diet and I'm like, oh, crap, like all of my, I don't eat animal. And so I'm like, all of my like protein sources, you know, legumes and, you know, I loved rice and all these things. I'm like, what do I do? And I felt like I was automatically like, I'm restricting. So you had noted that there are preparation techniques that one can use to help reduce the lectin content and make it easier to digest. What are those?
Well, so for instance, speaking of rice, the main lectins in rice are in the hull. And isn't it interesting that 4 billion people use rice as their staple, and yet 4 billion people go to the trouble of taking the hull off of brown rice and making it white before they eat it, because they're removing the major lectins in rice. Isn't it interesting in Italy, where, particularly in Tuscany, where beans are incredibly popular, they soak their beans for at least 24 hours and usually 48 hours. And anybody who's prepared beans properly know that if you put beans in water and wait a few hours, you will get all this scum up on the top. That scum is actually the fermentation of those beans by the bacteria that actually coat the actual bean. And these guys would, take that off, change the water, do it again, take that off. And so they were detoxifying the lectins in those beans. But nobody does that anymore. They just pour the beans and boil them and say, I'm fine. All of these cultures had these techniques to detoxify. I love the story, and I've heard it from so many Italians. Columbus, Italy's native son, brought tomatoes back to Italy. The Italians refused to eat tomatoes for 200 years because they knew they were a nightshade and they were part of the deadly nightshade family. It wasn't until they realized that the problems were in the peels and the seeds that they started to make tomato sauce, and they'd eat their tomatoes peeled and de-seeded. In fact, fun fact, the Roma tomato was hybridized by the Italians to have the most pulp versus the skin and the seeds. So you could just throw the tomatoes in water for a minute, peel the skin off, cut it in half, and scoop out the seeds and throw them in the pot and make tomato sauce. In fact, I was talking to one winemaker, and he has a beautiful organic garden with huge tomatoes, Roma tomatoes. And I said, so you eat tomatoes? Oh, geez, I wouldn't eat a tomato. Why would I do that? And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, they'll kill you. And I said, what do you mean? He says, my mother taught me that. And I said, well, where'd your mother learn that? And she said, oh, my grandmother taught her that. I said, well, then why did he grow all these? He said, wow, we take the peel off, we take the seeds out, and then we make the sauce. And now it's perfectly safe. Didn't you know that? And I said, well, I knew that. But he says, everybody knows that.
Crazy. It's crazy what different cultures know. And it actually seems really you're like, oh, it seems very ancestral and like old school. But going back to prepping beans and rice. So my mom, as I've mentioned to you, she was a functional nutritionist. So that's how I always knew how to prepare beans. Soak them in water overnight or for at least 8 hours, and the same thing with the rice. I actually went as far as letting it kind of like sprout a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So is that still safe if people do not own a pressure cooker?
Well, the good news is that you can buy pressure cooked beans and lentils. There's several companies that make them. Eden Brand makes them. Jovial is an Italian company that makes them. And Jovial, just think of a happy person. And so there are ways to get these things. Unfortunately, now most beans aren't pressure cooked. So you got to look for the ones that are pressure cooked. And then it's perfectly safe. I'll have beans several times a week as long as they're in a pressure cooked can.
Well, I think you put out a good point, which I want to touch on, which is you just have to look for it. Reading labels. I think that is such an ambiguous world to many people. And like we see ingredients on there and they're like, I don't want to deal with this. I don't have time to look it up. They grab something, they eat it, whatever. They're on the go. So when we are reading a label, what is the first thing that we should look at on a label?
Well, that's a complicated subject since 80% of the food we eat is now processed or ultra processed. Probably the first thing to realize is if something has a label with ingredients in it, put it back because you don't want to eat it. I think that's the best advice I can give anyone. There's no label on a head of broccoli. There's no label on a head of lettuce. There's no label on a fish that you buy from the fishmonger here in Santa Barbara. So just the fact that the label is there means that somebody's done something to this. Number two, interestingly enough, the current labeling law was manipulated by the Department of Agriculture, and I learned this from Dr. Kessler because he was in charge of the labeling laws. And when they first had the first labeling laws, any carbohydrate was labeled as a sugar, as it should be. And when they proposed the labeling laws, the Department of Agriculture said, wait a minute, you can't tell people how much sugar is in there because nobody will buy it. The FDA said, but a carbohydrate is a sugar and a sugar is a sugar. It eventually breaks down to sugar. They said, no, you can't do that. No one will buy any of our products. So they compromised and they decided that they would put total carbohydrates on the label. They would put fiber, which is not digested, and then they would put sugars. What they agreed on is if you have two sugar molecules bound together with a chemical bond, that makes it a starch, not a sugar, even though it's two sugar molecules. And you don't have to put it on the label as sugar. You can put it under carbohydrates. We have an enzyme in our mouth called amylase. That's job is to break the double bond on sugar molecules. So the minute it leaves your mouth, it's no longer a starch, it's a sugar. So what I do when I teach patients, and it's one of the best tricks that anybody can do, look at the label, read total carbohydrates in grams, take away the fiber, and that'll actually give you the grams of sugar in that serving. To make that easy to understand, there are 4 grams of carbohydrates in a teaspoon of sugar. So, for instance, a normal piece of bread or a normal tortilla will have about 16 to 18 grams of carbohydrates per slice or per tortilla. There may be 1 gram of fiber. So one piece of bread, and go to the store, do the experiment, has 4 teaspoons of sugar. 1 tortilla has 4 teaspoons of sugar. And as I tell my patients, I can tell you pour 4 teaspoons of sugar on your hand, you'll actually enjoy that far more than a slice of bread. But that's exactly what you're eating. And they're just incredulous that, oh my gosh, I had no idea. And the sugar will say 0 or 1 gram. They go, I've been eating all this low sugar products, and no wonder I'm not losing weight. No wonder my triglycerides are high. I thought I was doing the right thing. That's because it was gamed. It was manipulated to let us not know how much is in there.
That's crazy. No, like that's truly crazy. And I especially think about the people that they don't know these things. Like I didn't know that whole breakdown about, the division. I mean, you don't want to like spend your time in the grocery store, like doing math, you want it easy. You know what I'm saying? Like you want it easy and simple. And you're like, I just want like good, healthy food. But going back to the healing process, solutions, we want solutions here. So the gut microbiome, what are some foods that you can name off that will start to heal the gut? You mentioned fermentation, but what are some others?
So number one, we've lost our two main defense system against lectins. Number one, our gut microbiome that would like to eat them is not very good anymore. Number two, we have normally a thick layer of mucus that lines the wall of our gut. And mucus, if anyone has ever eaten a jalapeno pepper, you notice that your nose starts running. And it often runs a lot. And that runny nose is mucus. Mucus is mucopolysaccharides, lots of sugar molecules. And believe it or not, that is designed to grab the lectins in that jalapeno pepper and try to disable them before they get to you. Now, it's not very efficient, but that's why your nose runs after you eat spicy food, because that's a defense mechanism. To get back to your point, I can sell you products to help heal your leaky gut. But as I tell my patients and anyone who will listen, if you keep swallowing razor blades, and I think of lectins as razor blades, then you'll just slice it right back open. So to get to your question, there was some really cool experiments with humans by a husband and wife team at Stanford by the name of the Sonnenbergs. And everybody knows that fiber feeds friendly bacteria. Prebiotic fiber feeds friendly bacteria. Everybody knows that. So they said, hey, we're going to take a bunch of folks and we're going to give them a bunch of prebiotic fiber. In this case, it was inulin. Inulin is really cool. It's in asparagus, it's in artichokes, it's in artichoke hearts, it's in the chicory family of vegetables like radicchio, like Belgian endive, like frisee. And we're going to give them all this prebiotic fiber. And we're going to look at their gut microbiome diversity, how diverse their tropical rainforest is. And the more diverse, the better. And we're going to look at their markers of inflammation. So they gave these guys all this prebiotic, and their gut microbiome diversity didn't improve, and their inflammation markers didn't get any better. And they go, what the heck? We're giving these guys what they want. So they said, well, wait a minute. What if we give them fermented foods and the prebiotic fiber? Now, fermented foods make these compounds that I write about called postbiotics. And it's really confusing. Most people now know probiotics are friendly bacteria. People are beginning to realize that prebiotics are the foods that friendly bacteria want to eat. Postbiotics are the products that the bacteria make that actually benefit our health. And so those are postbiotics. And even dead bacteria qualify now as postbiotics. Okay, so they give these volunteers the same fiber, but they give them postbiotics in the form of yogurts and kefirs primarily. Then and only then did they get more bacterial diversity and the inflammatory markers went down. So, and I write about this a lot. So you can give these guys all the prebiotic fiber in the world, but you got to have actually precursors to make these important postbiotics that we want to calm inflammation and to seal the gut. And that also explains why all these healthy, old people from around the world are eating all these kind of fermented foods, all these yogurts, all these kefirs, all these kombuchas. They've been kind of, priming the pump to make all the beneficial compounds.
I love that you call them healthy old people. Are you talking about the blue zone regions?
Oh, please, let's not start on the blue zones.
But seriously, I mean, there are certain regions around the world, and we were just having a conversation about Italy and cultural influences and how things are passed down. It's a real thing. And over here in America, wonderful country for so many different reasons, but we're so left in the fog. It sucks.
Sickness is good for business in so many ways. The sicker we are, the better the pharmaceutical companies do, the better big medicine does, and the better big agriculture does. So the New York Times years ago did an expose looking at the board of directors of big medical schools, big pharma, big agriculture, and big petrochemical.
Mm-hmm.
And these boards all merged for very good reason, because what's good for big agriculture is good for big pharma. What's good for big pharma is good for big chemical, and so on. And it can't be broken.
Right.
I've written about this. Every time we try to break it, our Congress is given large amounts of money from these companies, and they need it to run for election. I don't fault them, but there's no way except the individual consumer to make a difference.
Exactly. I was just going to point that out. The individual consumer, you pay with your dollar every single time.
Yep.
But in order to pay with your dollar, you have to be educated. That's like why we're doing what we're doing.
Exactly.
The constant education, because by you transforming a life like mine and making me feel better, then I'm like, oh, this is what I learned. Hey, why don't you try this on yourself? Healing the gut, that's the goal, right? So we can protect ourselves from whatever invasive species are out there in forms of lectins or falsely picked foods at the unripened time, So going back to foods that heal the gut, we've got fermentation products.
Yeah, so fermentation is a great place to start. And we do, in my practice, have a large number of people who do react to dairy products. But you can have fermented coconut yogurt, for instance. You can have water-based kefirs or kombuchas. We have to be aware that most kombuchas, people don't like kind of bitter, sour things. So a lot of sugar is put in most commercial kombuchas to make them tasty. And again, you got to read the label. And just because it says kombucha and that's fermented and that's good, not so fast. There may be the same amount of sugar as in a soda in your healthy kombucha. So you're undoing any benefits that you might get.
I think, like a rule of thumb that everyone should consider is like simple is best. Like simple is best. Like nothing really needs to be complicated. I had Dr. Lee on my show and we went down a rabbit hole about spices and how spices can like add so much like value and content to something, right? Just toss it in there. You don't need to add the sugar. You don't need to add an extra goopy sauce or all the things like that. And they can also really benefit your gut health as well.
So spices are full of polyphenols. And one of the things we've learned over the last few years, so the polyphenols are all these dark, intense colors, primarily, in the fall, the leaves are going to change and we're going to see all these beautiful yellows and oranges and reds and magentas and purples. Those are the polyphenols in leaves. And those polyphenols actually protected the mitochondria in plants. When we eat these polyphenols in spices, it turns out our gut bacteria think they're just the best thing they've ever eaten in their lives. And they thrive by eating polyphenols. And they, in turn, make postbiotics from these polyphenols that benefit us. So that's number one. But the exciting new information in the next book, The Gut-Brain Paradox, is that spices are loaded, get ready for this, with bacteria that bacterial cell walls called LPSs. Now, if you've read my books, you go, wait a minute. Well, LPSs, those are, and I don't swear, but I can't resist calling them, they're little pieces of shit.
Oh.
Huh? Well, it turns out that the cell wall of bacteria are actually quite dangerous to us. They cause inflammation. We can measure them in people's blood. And they're called LPSs, lipopolysaccharides. But if you swallow LPSs, it actually primes your immune system to not get all excited when you see them in your bloodstream. Lo and behold, who would have guessed, but spices are loaded with LPSs that you eat. And it trains your immune system not to be worried about these guys. Root vegetables are loaded with bacteria and LPSs. So when you and I head to the farmer's market and we buy our carrots, please, please, please don't take them home and wash them. Just, rub them.
That's what I do.
Just rub them and eat them. When I was growing up, we pulled a carrot out of the garden and, ate it, brushed it off on our pants. We didn't go wash it. And I taught my kids to do that too. I didn't know it, but I was doing two things. I was introducing soil bacteria into me. But here's the new fun thing. I was actually eating LPSs that trained my immune system to not worry about them.
I love that.
Isn't that cool?
Well, yeah, because, when we talk about inflammation, I had, through one of my blood tests, some stragglers hanging around in there of the LPSs.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, geez, okay. And so I'm like, well, what can I do about it? And it goes back into healing the gut. So that's a really good fact. Let's reinstate that for everyone. What are some foods that we can adapt into our lives that help prepare the coating to prevent from those, can I call them dead LPSs?
Well, yeah, LPSs are actually the dead cell wall of bacteria.
Okay.
Of certain bacteria. And they're gram-negative bacteria, but we don't need to get really nerdy. And these guys, so I'll give you an example. Everybody knows Wim Hof, the Iceman. So you can do a fun experiment with human beings and with Wim Hof. We can take LPSs, which are dead bacteria. They are not living bacteria. And we can inject them into you or me or anybody, healthy volunteers, and they will go into septic shock as if living bacteria were killing them. We're that afraid of LPSs because we can't tell the difference between a dead bacteria and a living bacteria, right? So what Wim Hof does, and I wrote about this in Gut Check, he volunteers inject those guys into me. And using his breathing techniques, you just took a breath.
I won't do it.
He does not react to LPSs. And he's shown that he can train people with his methods and have them get injected with LPSs, and they don't react. And it actually has to do with breath work. So the cool thing is LPSs are really bad for you if they get into your system from your colon, where they normally would be. But the cool thing is if you swallow them, they act completely differently. They don't get into your system, but instead they educate the immune system about, oh, I see what those guys are. The example I use in my book, which is useful. When I was young, I had horrible allergies, hay fever and all this stuff, grasses, and I actually had to get allergy shots. And the principle of allergy shots is you start with a really tiny amount under the skin, and you gradually increase the amount until you become tolerant to that allergen. Your immune system goes, oh yeah, I've seen that guy. It didn't kill me, and I really shouldn't overreact. Well, now we know that eating these LPSs in spices, for instance, trains the immune system not to overreact when they happen to come through the wall of the gut into the colon. Wow.
Yeah. Wow. Wow, indeed. So what are the best anti-inflammatory foods that we should be eating?
That's one of the most hilarious things. So
Humor me.
inflammation comes from leaky gut. Hippocrates knew this 2,500 years ago. All disease begins in the gut. It sounds hokey. It sounds, oh, how silly. But even one of the great professors who literally proved how intestinal permeability in leaky gut occurs with lectins, Alessio Fasano, who's now at Harvard, he wrote a paper a couple years ago, all disease comes from a leaky gut. He actually stole a line from me, but that's okay. You could eat all the anti-inflammatory foods in the world, but if you have leaky gut, as you and I know living in Santa Barbara, that's like fighting a forest fire with a garden hose. If you've got leaky gut, you can put your turmeric in your smoothie and it's not going to do anything. You have to eat foods that allow your gut microbiome to seal your leaky gut. Once you do that, you won't have inflammation. There's no such thing as an anti-inflammatory food. You have to have foods that help your microbiome grow and foster and then help seal your leaky gut.
Let's get specific on that. So I'm going to Lazy Acres up the road. I got my little shopping cart. And I'm like, all right, Dr. Gundry's in my head. I've got to get dinner for tonight. What is on my shopping list?
It depends. It really depends on how leaky a gut you have. For instance,
how leaky is my gut?
Well, we can't talk specifics because then HIPAA will. Anyhow, so you've got leaky gut. Believe it or not, most people with any disease process have leaky gut. 100% of people with autoimmune disease in my practice have leaky gut. 100% of people with diabetes or pre-diabetes in my practice have leaky gut. 100% of people with Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or dementia have leaky gut. 100% of people with coronary artery disease in my practice have leaky gut. If you're thinking I'm naming lots of people, you're right. 100% of people with anxiety and depression have leaky gut. So it's much bigger than we possibly could have imagined. Now, there are degrees. For instance, I have some people that their leaky guts are so leaky that they can't even tolerate a green salad because even these wonderful foods like lettuce just tear them to shreds. And we have to put them on an elimination diet to really take away any potential mischief makers. And so what does an elimination diet look like? Well, in the new book, it's basically wild fish, pastured chicken, maybe, and some fermented foods like, for instance, coconut yogurt, and not much else until we quiet things down. And the next step for these really severe people is they pressure cooked almost everything. Pressure cooked sweet potatoes. They pressure cooked their broccoli and cauliflower basically to mush, and so that you're eliminating all these potential plant toxins. It's amazing how many people are so intolerant to these plant toxins that we really have to start very slowly. Now, most people, that's not true. Most people, we just have to eliminate the real culprits, and those are most of the grains. There's 2 safe grains, sorghum and millet, that don't have lectins. Teff is right up there the same way. There's another little tiny millet called fornio, which is really cool, fonio, which you can cook, and it tastes like cream of wheat or and
like amaranth almost.
Yeah, but amaranth has a lectin, unfortunately.
Yes, I've learned that.
Okay.
Around the block. Yep.
And again, the more we can get fermented foods into people, the better. Number one, most people with leaky gut have low vitamin Ds, and it's just nearly universal. And vitamin D is so, so important to actually improve your microbiome. There's really cool papers showing the higher your vitamin D level, the more diverse your microbiome. That's a good thing. I've written about, there's really good research that we have stem cells lining our gut. Our gut, the wall of our gut turns over very rapidly. Those stem cells have to replace the cells that get damaged in the lining of our gut. The stem cells are responsive to vitamin D. And if you have a lot of vitamin D says, hey, you guys, wake up. There's a hole. Grow, fill that hole. If you don't have a good enough vitamin D, these stem cells, they just sit there and go, well, what do you want me to do? I'm not getting any messages that I need to do something.
So when we talk about elimination diet, also, I think about how we can kind of do things by challenging ourselves every single day. Like many people fast. And I feel like you are a proponent of fasting.
Intermittent fasting.
So describe that a little bit, and the fasting that you talk about with your work that you specifically do, and how can it support this detoxification process in the body?
All cultures have some form of fasting ritual. Most religions have a fasting ritual. But the problem with fasting, and it actually gets back to what we started with the Biosphere 2 experiment, the geodesic domes in Arizona. These people basically starved to death for about 6 months. And what we've learned is we have lots of toxins in us. So does a swordfish. So does a tuna. But a swordfish and a tuna may have toxic levels of mercury, but they're 1,000-pound fish that are rather powerful. Why isn't that mercury killing those animals? Well, that's because we store our toxins in fat. And as long as it's stored in fat, for the most part, it's fairly harmless. When we fast, we start breaking down fat cells for energy. We start burning free fatty acids and ketones. And a 3-day fast will actually toxify you because you start releasing all these toxins and heavy metals into your bloodstream. The liver is a lousy agent for detoxification. We have phase 1, we have phase 2 detoxification enzymes, but we have no enzymes to detoxify heavy metals. So the liver says, oh, geez, I don't like these guys. I'm going to get rid of them because I can't do anything with them. I'm going to put them in bile, and the bile will squirt into the intestines, and I'll be rid of it. Sounds like a good idea. The problem is, once these heavy metals get in our intestines, guess what? we reabsorb them. So I see a lot of my fasting patients continue to have high levels of heavy metals, just like was found in the Biosphere 2 experiment. So what's the answer? The answer is intermittent fasting for two reasons. Number one, we're now realizing, just like everybody knows, if you don't get good quality sleep, your brain is screwed. Your brain, right? I'm a heart surgeon. I understand lack of sleep, but your brain has to have downtime to repair itself. It has to have downtime to wash out all the toxins that accumulate in the brain. And we now know that you literally need 6 to 8 hours of quality sleep to accomplish this. What we should have realized is that normally the gut should have a long period of time where it doesn't have to do any work. Now, that was easy way back when because we got up with the sun. We didn't eat until we found something to eat. We didn't crawl out of our cave and say, what's for breakfast? There wasn't any Kellogg's Corn Flakes. We had to find something to eat. And if you look at hunter-gatherers, they don't eat until 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning until they find something. So we had a period of time, and we stopped eating in general when it was dark. So we had conservatively 16, 18 hours every day where we were not digesting food. And so we had this built-in system of repairing the damage that was done to our gut. Now, work from Scripps in San Diego has shown that the average American is eating 16, even 18 hours a day.
Are you kidding me?
Seriously, from the second we get up till the minute we go to sleep. And half the time we get up and have a snack in the middle of the night. So we never have given our gut any time of resting. And beautiful work that I've written about in previous books and in Gut Check from the NIH show that if you can get to a 6 to 8 hour window of eating, which means a non-eating window of 16, 18 hours of not eating, all sorts of, I hate to use the word, miraculous things happen. You extend your lifespan dramatically. You extend your health span dramatically. Part of that is because all disease begins in the gut, and all disease begins in a leaky gut. You repair the wall of your gut. End of story. You're good.
Ooh, I love that.
Yeah.
Going back to plant-based diets, and then we're going to wrap it up. But your book, The Plant Paradox, widely known. It had a lot of people rethink, the plant-based diet. I know I got a lot of hate for a long time, like, oh, you eat only plants. Did you know X, Y, and Z? And but I think there's a lot of truth to be said in there. So what would you say, what is one of the biggest misconceptions about eating plant-based foods?
Well, so many plant-based foods are ultra-processed foods. And we make the mistake in thinking that just because it's a plant, that means it's good for us. And plants, again, there's a lot of plants that do not want to be eaten, like we've started all this. There are plants that are actually really friendly and want you to eat them. In fact, we spent 2 days at this meeting in Malta talking about in plants, in leaves, there are actual, how shall I describe them? Text messages that are called extracellular vesicles. And there won't be a test, I promise. And so these plants actually make little packets of information that have really cool pieces of RNA and DNA, have really cool pieces of mitochondria that can actually merge with us with our bacteria, teach our bacteria, teach us. So plants actually talk to us. It's called trans-kingdom communication. And we're now finally beginning to understand the language that plants use to talk to us, to talk to bacteria. We're now beginning to understand the language that bacteria use to talk to us, to make us do things that we might not want to. And that's the basis of the next book, The Gut Brain Paradox. But the point of all this is, there's some really good plants for you, but you got to know who's your friend, and you got to know who you really need to detoxify before you eat them. And cultures have known this, and that's why I like to study, long-lived cultures and healthy cultures and find out, okay, what tricks did you guys figure out through the years that made this work for you? And the information's there. You just have to get it out from them. It's like, how come your grandmother taught you not to eat tomatoes, right? It's
right. Ask the question.
Yeah.
So what is one friendly plant that we should be eating?
I really think that the chicory family of vegetables is underutilized, particularly in our diet. I'll give you an example. I have never had a salad in Italy or France that didn't have a chicory vegetable as part of that salad. It's like weird. It's like, what's all this radicchio doing in my salad? What's all this frisee doing in my salad? What's this Belgian endive doing in my salad? Like tricolore salad, maybe the most famous salad in Italy, is radicchio, the red, Belgian endive, the white, and arugula, which is a cruciferous vegetable. And you go, what the heck? Why? Yeah, that's the color of the Italian flag. I get it. But why'd you guys choose that? So why did this become a part of the diet? Well, it's because bacteria, our gut microbiome, just love these compounds, inulin-containing compounds. And they taste great, so why not? But it's in every salad. It's like, how'd they come up with this? And it's been part of their culture for thousands of years.
And what is your everyday non-negotiable?
Everyday non-negotiable is I have to take 10,000 international units of vitamin D3 a day, period. That's non-negotiable. The University of California, San Diego, one of the biggest vitamin D research groups in the world, thinks the average American should be taking 9,600 international units of vitamin D3 a day for health. And people go, wow, that's a lot of vitamin D. Believe it or not, that's not much vitamin D. There's a really cool study that I recently found that they took people with vitiligo, where you lose pigmentation. Michael Jackson suffered from vitiligo, and eczema. And they gave them 35,000 international units of vitamin D3 a day for 6 months. Nobody died, and their vitiligo and their eczema went away. Don't rush out and take 35,000 international units of vitamin D3. But I have some people with really leaky gut that I'll start them on 40,000 international units of vitamin D a day with some vitamin K2. So that's non-negotiable. Number 2, non-negotiable, you have to have long-chain omega-3 fatty acids. Now, you can get them from algae-based or you can get them from fish. I don't care. But you got to do that. Almost everybody is deficient. And it really helps seals leaky gut.
So we'd say like a fish oil?
Yeah, fish oil.
Great. That's a great example. So I feel like you already mentioned this, but what is one easy toxic-free habit that everyone can start doing and applying to their life today, right here, right now?
100% of my patients with leaky gut have antibodies to wheat. So wheat, rye, barley, oats. Number one thing they can do today is stop eating wheat, rye, barley, and oats. And that includes beer.
What is a substitute that they can, they're like, I want to have my toast in the morning. What's a great substitute for that?
Well, so you can make there are really good breads out there that are based on sorghum or millet or teff or cassava flour or tiger nut flour. And those actually are really safe. Try to be aware that most gluten-free products in the United States have either corn or brown rice in them, and they're both full of lectins. And I see so many of my well-meaning patients eating gluten-free and not improving.
Yeah.
In fact, I talk about it in the Plant Paradox. There was a really cool study done with celiac disease patients. Celiac is the extreme form of gluten intolerance. And the gold standard of diagnosing celiac is a duodenal biopsy. It's taking a piece of the intestine and looking at it under the microscope. So they took these people with biopsy-proven celiac disease, put them on a gluten-free diet for a year and a half, and then rebiopsying them. 70% of these people eating a gluten-free diet still had celiac disease at the end of a year and a half. That's because most of the foods that they were eating that were gluten-free were lectin-rich. And I see this in my practice as well. I have a lot of celiac patients who still have celiac on a gluten-free diet, and they're going, what the heck? When I take their gluten-free foods away from them, their celiac resolves.
Yeah, I think that's something to be mindful about. I eat out, not a lot, but I eat out, and I travel. You do as well. And so you have to be very cognizant with like, okay, what can I pick off the menu and combine together and make my own meal? Because at the end of the day, people are going to give up and they're going to say like, I feel restricted. I don't have any joy in my life. So by educating yourself and knowing like right now, like sometimes things are a process in order to heal the leaky gut. Yep. You do an excellent job of doing that. Sometimes it's not forever. You just have to heal that leaky gut because a leaky gut is the root of all disease. So go with your gut. Go with your gut. Where can everyone find you, Dr. Gundry?
Well, on your podcast, of course. Toxic-Free with KB.
You're so searchable.
The Dr. Gundry podcast, my food and supplement company, GundryMD.com, drgundry.com. I have 2 YouTube channels, Instagram. And if I don't pop up while you're surfing something, I've done a very bad job.
No, you're doing a great job. This is actually, I was like finding this, and this is one of the newest books.
Yeah, that's the newest book.
This is the newest book. I just want to because I have to go pick it up. It's like, I literally was just leafing through some of the pages and I was like, oh yeah, there's the LPSs. So I love books like that. You guys go pick up the books. I mean, there's like a trillion books out there, the whole Paradox series. That'll get you going. So thanks, Dr. Gundry, so much for joining us today.
Good to see you.
You're welcome back anytime. My mic is your mic.
All right.
My newest hot habit, actually, I don't feel like it is that new, but screen ban, right? Avoiding screens in the bedroom. So keeping your TV, your tablets, all the little knickknacks you have in there that are glowing up in the middle of the night and distracting you from your snooze. As our guest just said, 8 hours of sleep is vital. Kick those suckers out of the bedroom. It's really meant to have, that sanctuary space for you guys to rest and digest. So take that on for a try this evening and ban the screens from the bedroom. And next, my trendy trends. Okay, mouth tape, right? Mouth tape. Guys, mouth tape was created all hyped up about keeping your mouth shut while you are sleeping. And since we're on the trajectory of sleep, the idea is that breathing through your nose can improve your health in so many various ways, including reducing snoring, improving your sleep, and reducing bad breath. So I don't know. I'm really intrigued. I kind of want to try that one on for size to see. A lot of women actually, that one woman in particular has said she's done it for a prolonged period of time and it's actually changed her facial structure. So I might play around with it. Let me know if you have a favorite brand and send me a DM about that. All right. Thanks for tuning in as always. I appreciate y'all. And remember, you're doing your best and your best is great. See you next time. Thanks for watching Toxic-Free with KB.
Please subscribe to the show, comment below, and check us out on Instagram at toxicfree.kb and TikTok at toxicfree.kb. See you next time. This is a Kilo Bravo Media production brought to you by Rainbow Creative.